Hello everyone and welcome to the video. My name is Vishal Kuruganti and today I'll be discussing the process of integrating CyberArk's privileged account security solution with DUOS two-factor authentication. The agenda of this presentation is to shed light on the following topics. What is an authentication factor? Understanding the CyberArk PAS login process. Understanding the Duo authentication proxy, followed by the demo. Authentication is the first step in access control. An authentication factor is a credential that is intended to verify that an entity involved in some kind of communication or requesting access to a particular system is who or what they claim to be. Let's take a look at the type of authentication factors. There are three broad categories of authentication factors. Knowledge factor. A knowledge factor is something you know, such as a username or a password. Possession factor. A possession factor is something you have, such as a smart card or a security token. Inherence factor. An inherence factor is something you are, an inherent biometric characteristic such as a fingerprint, voice, or iris pattern. Specifically, in the case of a two-factor authentication system, authentication factors can further be classified into primary and secondary authentication. As the name suggests, the primary authentication factor is evaluated first, followed by the secondary authentication. If the primary authentication is incorrect, the system does not move to evaluate the secondary authentication. Consider the following scenario. A user logs into a system using an RSA token and a smart card. It is important to understand that two separate categories of factors of authentication are required to make up the two-factor authentication system. The RSA token and the smart card are both possession-based factors and may compromise the security of the system if they are lost or stolen. Consider another example. A user tries to log into a system by using his password and a smart card. In the second example, even if the smart card is lost, the overall security of the system is not compromised. The CyberArk Privileged Account Security solution supports various authentication mechanisms, including LDAP, Radius, and RSA. In the current demonstration, LDAP authentication will be used to log into the PVWA. The CyberArk Privileged Account Security solution provides two types of LDAP users. CyberArk Managed LDAP users are the accounts that have been created either during the install process or accounts that have been added manually using the private ARC client or the PVWA. Transparent LDAP users. The Privileged Account Security solution transparently supports user accounts or groups of users whose details are stored externally in an LDAP directory. In order to maintain the typical high level of security in the vault, the security attributes of such user accounts and groups are managed internally. Let's take a look at the CyberArk login process. An LDAP user tries to authenticate in the PVWA using his SAM account name and his password. These credentials are then transported to the CyberArk PAS solution using CyberArk's internal VPN. These credentials are then validated against the LDAP server or a domain controller. And on successful authentication, the CyberArk PAS solution sends a response to the PVWA that authenticates the user. This section outlines the Duo authentication proxy. The Duo authentication proxy is a local proxy service on a machine within the network. It can be installed on a physical or a virtual host, and it can run on Linux or Windows. The existing LDAP configuration of the CyberArk PAS solution is modified to allow the Duo authentication proxy to act as the authentication server for LDAP credentials as well as Duo push. The file authproxy.cfg is used to configure the details of the LDAP as well as the Duo instance. Since the secondary authentication mechanism is handled by Duo, LDAP users must be created in the Duo instance as well. Users can be created in two ways: CSV import or directory synchronization. Azure AD, on-premise AD, and OpenLDAP are supported by Duo. These directories can also be scheduled for synchronization with Duo. Consider the example from before, where an LDAP user tries to log into the PVWA, except that the authentication is now handled by the Duo Authentication Proxy. Primary authentication is initiated to CyberArk Privileged Account Security. CyberArk Privileged Account Security sends the authentication request to Duo Security's Authentication Proxy, which then verifies the LDAP credentials, and on successful primary authentication, the authentication proxy establishes a connection to Duo Security over TCP port 443. Secondary authentication is done via Duo Security service, where a user receives a push notification on their device. Duo Authentication Proxy receives an authentication response, and on successful primary and secondary authentication, the access to the PVWA is granted. Please follow us on our social media.
Here's a quick demo of the integration. LDAP is chosen as the authentication method on the PVWA. The SAM account name and LDAP password are entered as the credentials. On successful primary authentication, a push notification is sent to the user's device as configured on the Duo instance. When the access request is approved, the user is granted access to the PVWA.
Brings us to the end of this presentation. I hope this was a very informative session. Thank you.